Hello, and welcome to My Favorite Games, a podcast for game designers to geek out about games they like to play. Today, I'm super excited to host Roberto Panetta. After studying design and working in commercial refrigeration for 15 years, in 2023, Roberto decided to resign from his position as VP of Sales and Marketing to chase a lifelong dream of becoming a game designer. He's now the founder of Rock, Stone, and Dice Games. Great name. And his first title, Gems of Iridecia, is live on Kickstarter right now. Roberto, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to talk about some games.
Oh, I am too. So before we dig into the games that you've actually brought with you today, we'll dig into your career shift in a bit because I'm really interested in hearing about that. But judging from your background, anyone who's watching this podcast episode, I have to ask, would you identify yourself as a gamer? Have you always played games?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a young age, I've always enjoyed playing games. When I was younger, really, I was more into video games than board games. Then a few years ago, I kind of just my interest in video games started to wane, and I started to just prefer board games. I think maybe it was like the social interaction or being in the same room as people. Because I mean, growing up, the video games we played in the same room, right? Like Mario Kart, we used to play all in the same room. But now everything's so online that you don't have that same, personal connection. So I think I like being in a room with other people.
Very cool. I mean, anybody who's not watching your background, it looks like some sort of board game fan prepper's bunker of their dreams in terms of having your whole collection. It's just very, very cool.
That was actually my pandemic project. When the first year of the pandemic, when we're all in lockdown, I gutted my basement and I just rebuilt it myself into kind of like I don't like the word man cave, but it's my adult playroom.
Well, incredibly jealous on just the just not only the amount but the use of space there. It's pretty impressive. So today you have brought a game called Lost Ruins of Arnak. Tell me about it. What do you love about it?
So I think for me, the first thing when it comes to games is theme. Like it's always the theme that brings me in. And I just love that kind of Indiana Jones-esque adventure / exploration theme. So just from the start, just seeing the box, like, oh, this sounds cool. And I remember listening to a podcast. I can't remember which podcast it was, but they were just describing the game. And this is kind of before I really got heavy into games. And I heard them describing that game. And I was like, oh, I want to try that. And so I went to the store, picked it up, and I invited my friends over for a game night, and we played it. And we were all really terrible at it. I think we got like 30 points, whereas like now a good score is like you want to be in the high 80s or 90s. So we were all really terrible at it. It was probably like the first real like worker placement game that I played. And for sure. It's just the theme really sucked me in.
So themes obviously incredibly important. It's a worker placement game. Are there, aside from it kind of almost, I wouldn't say it's a gateway drug, but like a gateway game for you, are there specific things about it that you think are relatively unique, or is it the fact that it's a good representation of a genre that makes it special?
Yeah, it definitely does a few things unique. I mean, for myself, it was the first game that I played that combined worker placement with deck building. I wouldn't say it's like a heavy deck builder, but there's a deck building element to it that I really like. So there's that puzzle. It's kind of like that push-pull. You're trying to decide, hey, do I spend these resources to buy this card that might build my engine, so to speak, a little better? Or do I go for this like immediate reward, or do I need to do this action or go to this space first because I know that my competitor is going to go to that space? So I really like that decision space as to when to do what, when to go to visit a site, when to buy a card. I also really love what they did with the, I don't know how familiar you are with the game, but in the game you can purchase two different types of cards. You can purchase, I believe they're called item cards, or you can purchase artifacts. And what's interesting is the artifacts a little more powerful, and they cost a different resource, whereas the item cards are a little less powerful. They cost a lesser resource. But as the game progresses, there starts to be more artifacts available than items, because the market kind of changes. I believe there's a total of 6 or 7 cards in the market, and like in the first round it's only one artifact, and then the rest are items, and then every round that shifts, and so the next round would be 2 artifacts and then less items. So I really thought that was interesting and unique.
So a bit of a self balancing when it comes to demand and market demand.
Sure.
That changes the dynamic as you're playing.
Yeah, and there's also like 2 parts of the board. There's a main part where you're doing kind of the exploration, discovering sites, finding things, finding resources. And then there's this other side of the board called the resource track. And there's kind of a race up that track, because the quicker you go up that track, the better the bonuses you'll get are. So it's kind of also, you have to make that decision. Hey, do I focus on this resource track, or do I focus on exploring sites and overcoming the monsters in the game, which they call guardians? So there's just an interesting decision space.
What kind of effect did it have on you when you were then considering, buying more games or getting more into games? Like how did it kind of fit in that along that journey of discovery for you into this hobby that now you're kind of turning into a profession?
It's funny because I talked about theme being important to me. So the first game I ever bought on Kickstarter, and this is like before I really knew Kickstarter was a thing, an ad popped up in one of my feeds for the game Fireball Island by Restoration Games. Now, Fireball Island is like a game from the 80s. And as soon as that ad popped up in my Facebook feed, I remembered seeing like the Saturday morning cartoon ad for that board game. And I remember always wanting that board game as a kid, and I never got it, never had it. And then I saw this Kickstarter for like this company, Restoration Games, that was bringing that game back to life and, modernizing it and whatnot. I was like, this is so cool. I'm like, I never was able to have that game as a kid. Now, I'm an adult. I can afford to get it myself. I'm like, I want to get that game. And so I remember getting that as my first Kickstarter, even though the game is a little not as interesting as an adult, but it was just that nostalgia that got me there.
Yeah. So in a similar way, you mean the nostalgia factor kind of played a little role? Like, was there definitely a heavy kind of, or is there a heavy Indiana Jones hint with with this one?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. It's definitely in that same theme, that same kind of world. And not sure why that theme speaks to me so much, but it just does. I've got a bunch of games kind of in that same genre, same theme. And actually, it was one of the biggest influences. Lost Ruins of Rhinak was probably one of the biggest influences on my game, just in the sense that in my game, you're revealing tiles, or you're flipping over tiles to reveal a resource and then gaining that resource and having to manage those resources. So like that was something that like I really appreciated and wanted to have in my game, because I like that feeling of discovery, and I like randomness in games. I know some people are like, oh, they don't like luck. They don't want to lose a game because of bad luck. I see it a different way. I like a game where anybody at the table has a chance to win. Not necessarily the person who's the best at the game, or not necessarily the smartest person in the room. Sometimes the right card's going to come out for you at the right time, and that's fun. So that's another important thing for me in games. I do like a little luck and a little randomness, a little chaos.
A little chaos, yeah, but also it's not just designing a game that has lots of chance. There's also there's a lot of balancing that you need to do in order to make a game winnable by anyone, right? And so I do see that kind of debate quite a bit. Well, depending on the types of games that you not only like or what you're trying to build, do you make it like a skill based? Do you reduce the amount of chance or randomness, and how do you deploy it? Is randomness and chance a mechanic that for you to deploy, or is it a genre of games that don't seem to be very popular, right now, even though some of the most popular games in human history are chance games?
Yeah. Well, it's a fine line, and you brought up a good point as to, I think you want to make sure that the player's actions are consequential as well, right? You don't want it to be completely up to luck, because that's not fun either. So you want the player to feel, not just feel, you want the player to have an influence on the outcome of the game. That's important for sure. And definitely, in the end, the person with the best strategy or the best knowledge of the game should win more often than not. But there still should be an opportunity for other players to have fun, to stay in the game, to make it competitive without getting blown out of the water.
So you brought another game with you.
I did.
That before we got on, you described as very addictive, called Little Tavern. Talk to me about it. Why is it so addictive?
It's a super small box game, and it's so silly and stupid. And I'm somebody who really likes whimsical kind of artwork. I like fun, lighthearted games. I like a bit of humor in the game. And the premise of the game is that you're servers working in a tavern, and there's seven different types of patrons that could potentially visit your tavern and sit at your table. Now, everybody can seat 4 people at their table. And essentially on your turn, you're drafting a card. You don't know what it's going to be. It's going to be one of these 7 patrons. And you're either placing it at your table or at somebody else's table. And once everybody's table is full, everybody's got 4 people at the table, you score. And each of the 7 patrons score differently. So, for example, there are elves that want to be at table with other elves. Dwarves don't want to be at a table with other dwarves. They want to be at a table with people of different races. You have romantics that must be at a table with another romantic. You have goblins that don't tip at all, so they're all worth 0, unless you have the Goblin King card, who's like, and it's funny, all the goblins have their names all start with Billy, so it's like Billy, Billy John, Billy Joe. It's just so silly, but it's fun. You can teach it in 30 seconds. Always leads to some laughing and fun and hilarity. And it's just, it's one of those light filler/gateway games.
Nice. Interesting. And so both of these are quite different, quite different to each other. And I think the way that you describe that, the Little Tavern as like a gateway game or a filler game, one to start the night out on, I guess, sure. Maybe.
Or end the night sometimes.
Yeah. Or end the night, yeah. A little palate cleanser before we all go home. But how have both of those, or what if any, inspiration or what effect have those games or other ones that you've played had on Gems of Eurydice, especially, aside from, what you'd mentioned, before about the Arnak. Are there specific mechanics or are there specific concepts or even feelings that you've learned and then brought forward to the way that you're going about game design?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned before, like Lost Ruins of Arnak was definitely a big inspiration on the game. And for me, it was just that idea of revealing a tile and seeing what resource was under it. In my game, you actually, on your turn, you reveal 2 tiles, and then you make a choice as to which one to move on to. So even though there's a bit of randomness as to you don't know what you're going to uncover, but you still have choices to make once they're uncovered. You're not like forced with the one thing that you flipped. So I thought that's really interesting. When I first started the game, it was way too big, way too complicated. It had a deck building element to it. It had a whole other side of the board where there was like 2 phases to the game, and it was just so long and so boring. But I was really lucky. I went to an event called Metatopia that's held in New Jersey in the US every year. And this is an event specifically for designers who want to playtest their games. And what was cool, I was really lucky. I had you get to do a bunch of different playtests, but you also get at least one what they call a high-level test, where you'll usually have a fairly accomplished designer playing your game. I was very lucky to have Jonathan Gilmore Long, who's probably best known for the game Dead of Winter. He played my game, and he's like, hey, this part of your game is awesome. This is fun. He's like, cut all this rest of the stuff out. Focus on this. Make this more fun. And it's interesting. As a designer, that really taught me a lesson, because early on in the design process, every time I encountered something I didn't like or a problem, it's like, oh, let me add this to fix this. Whereas Jonathan's approach, which was much smarter, is kind of less is more, right? Take things away, strip it away until you get to that core fun of your game and then focus on making that better.
Before we kind of get into the game itself, just sticking on that point, the whole idea of feedback and playtesting, I think it kind of splits game designers, or at least those that I've interacted with. Some people thrive on it and they really love getting their game tested as much as possible, getting it ripped to shreds and then build it back up again. Whereas others get a little bit offended, right? And they take it quite personally, and they're not huge fans of feedback. How has the role of feedback playtesting gone into how you see game design, and had it changed after that experience?
I'd say surprisingly, I've been able to take feedback a lot better than I thought I would. Like before I ever put my game in front of people, I was like kind of terrified. But I think I was lucky, and maybe it's lucky, maybe it's something else, but in the sense that every time something was really wrong with the game or broken, so to speak, I can always immediately see like a solution or potential solution. So it was never like, oh my God, my game broke. I have no idea how to fix it. I don't know what to do next. So I think as a designer, if you get to that point, then it's kind of terrifying because you realize you don't know how to fix it. But I was never in that situation yet with Gems of Iridecia, and this is my first game, so I'm sure I will encounter that problem at some point down the future. But I never had a problem that I didn't feel I could fix.
So let's talk about then Gems of Iridecia. Like just describe it for us. Whether it's the pitch or the just general description of what is it about.
Sure. Well, so I consider myself a hobby ambassador. And when I say that, so in Montreal, where I'm from, there's a very thriving local board game meetup scene. And we have like over 3,000 members, and there's 2 to 3 events per week. And there's not 3,000 people at each event. There's probably a good, 60 to 80 regulars that are actually the ones that come in, week out. But I'm one of the hosts of that group, meaning I'm often teaching games to new players. But even though I'm there as a host, I'm also there to have fun and to play games. I mean, this is my free time. It's my leisure time. I want to go there and have fun too. So I really like games that are approachable enough that it's easy to teach and learn for a new player, but there's enough depth of strategy, enough interesting choices, enough things to do that somebody who's more experienced will also enjoy being at the table. So that was like the main thing I wanted to do with Gems of Iridecia. And I think at a surface level, when you look at it, the design, the choices you have on your turn are fairly straightforward, but it's the way those choices are layered that may add some depth in the different ways that you can score. But overall, the game, in a nutshell, you're flipping over tiles to reveal gems. As soon as you reveal a tile, as soon as you place your worker on a tile, you gain a gem of that color. And there's 4 different gem types. And then you have a choice. Every player, you always start with 1 pickaxe, but you can purchase more. And you can use that pickaxe to attempt to mine more gems from that tile by rolling dice. But what's the heart of the game is really that each of the 4 gem colors is tied to a 6-sided die. And we call that the gem market. And all of the actions you do in the game will affect that market. So there's some timing as to when to attempt to mine gems, because you need to roll equal to or greater than their current value, or when to sell gems, because you can also sell them for their current value. So trying to mine when they're low, sell when they're high is ideal. But then there's a bunch of cards in the game that really allow you to kind of break things and make a little chaos with that market. For example, the dice wraps around from a 1 to 6. If you have a card such as there's one called the Dazzling Dynamite that allows you to modify a die by up to plus or minus 2. If a die is at 6, you can flip it to a 1 or vice versa. So for example, I move onto a tile, the value is 1, I can mine the heck out of it, gain a bunch of them, then flip it to a 6 and sell them, for more money, buy better items and do more and more. So that's kind of like the game in a nutshell. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but yeah.
So it seems like, especially when you describe it, that you're talking a lot about like the mechanics that clearly, as a gamer yourself, get you going, get you excited. How did you think about the mechanics when it came to Gems of Eurydice? Like, did you approach it? Did you approach it from that narrative first, and you say, "Oh, I want to make a game that, I don't know, has a bit of hint of, a little adventure-y type, theme. Let me now go and figure out the right mechanics," or was it mechanics first, and then you figured out, what story might work well for that?
Yeah, so I had just from being in that local meetup group, I had been playing a lot of games, and as I mentioned before, I love the idea of revealing something like Lost Ruins of Arnak. You reveal a tile, and there's a resource under it. The other thing is, I played a game, and I wish I could remember the name, but it was like a simple card game about vegetables, and essentially the cards, as you played them, would affect the value of those vegetables. So there was like this dynamic market. So I thought it'd be really fun to have a game where you're revealing a resource, but each of those resources is tied to a fluctuating dynamic market that's affected by player actions. That was really like the core idea of the game. Then it's just, trying to figure out what resource would be fun, and based on the themes that I like, and also the idea of unearthing a gem, I thought that would be fun. So it just ended up being gems. And another fun part of it is, I wanted to create a world that we could potentially revisit in other games. So, Gems of Eurydice is a certain type of game, but maybe I'll make a completely other type of game that would also take place in Eurydice. So I had a lot of fun actually with my family, with my wife and kids at the dinner table, just coming up with ideas for the different types of characters that would be in the game, for, what the world would look like. My wife actually came up with the name Eurydice, which at first the game was called Rock, Stone, and Skies, but it ended up becoming Gems of Eurydice over time.
Very cool. So, I mean, definitely conveys like some brightness, right? But what's special about the world that you've kind of created here?
It's just whimsical, funny, weird. I mean, there's a race of Viking otters, and that's just because my son's like, it'd be cool if there were Viking otters, and his favorite color is blue, so that clan is blue in the game. We came up with this idea of these robots that were really good at mining. So like one of the groups is robots. Then there's like these gnomish engineers, like just really fun, whimsical world, lighthearted. I really like hand-drawn art styles as well. So that was something that was important when looking for an illustrator, to try to find somebody that had kind of like the look and feel that I wanted for Eurydice.
So you've been a player for a long time, but you were also in a career, right? In commercial refrigeration.
Yeah.
How did you go from, oh, I love playing games, I love being kind of a leader in a community for board gamers, to, I feel like I can design a game, and more so, I'd like to shift careers and just become a game designer?
So it's funny. So I actually studied design for 7 years. So I'm in Canada, and here we have something called CEGEP, which is similar to college in the US. So I went to CEGEP and I studied design for 4 years, which is mostly graphic design, but we touched on other types of design. And then I went to university to get a bachelor's in fine arts, also in a design program. And at the time, my goal was to go into the video game industry, because in Montreal, there's a lot of major video game publishers here. And I was like, oh, it'd be really cool to get this design experience, and I can do something in the video game space, because that was really my obsession growing up. And at the time, I was actually working at a video game store and things like that. That was really like my passion. Once I graduated from university, I was offered a job at a commercial refrigeration place. And it's like, hey, I need to get some sort of experience, so let me accept this job. And at the time I was designing artwork for customers that would buy branded fridges. Like, for example, if Pepsi bought a fridge, I would work with their assets and create the artwork that would go on that branded fridge. It was a very small company at the time, and they only had one salesman. And for whatever reason, the owner of the company fired that salesman, and he told me the next day that I was going to be doing sales. So I was like, okay. And so I just tried it out, and I ended up being good at it. But, I'm a creative person. I studied design, degree in fine arts. I always wanted to do something creative. And the problem is I got stuck kind of in this loop, right? Because you've accepted this job and then you do well at it. So you start making a certain amount of money, and then, you know, you get married, you have kids, you have a mortgage, and you have bills to pay. And all of a sudden you become risk averse, right? Like, oh, I better keep this job because, you know, this is paying the bills. Fast forward 15 years later, it's like, I was really struggling. I was having a hard time with my career choices. And I felt kind of like stuck. And not that it was a bad job. It's not a dead end job. I was making great money. I was doing well. It just wasn't me. I always had to pretend that I was somebody that I'm not, because I'm a nerd. I'm a geek. I want to talk about Lord of the Rings. I want to talk about Star Wars. I want to talk about board games. I want to talk about video games. I play with Lego. But in this corporate world of grocery stores and commercial refrigeration, all the socializing and events that I have to do and networking and whatnot, it's like talking about like golf and like cars and like things that just like don't interest me. I just never felt like I fit in, and I never wanted to be in sales. So it led me to depression, and that was something that I struggled with, and created anxiety as well. And then I just crashed. Like I had a complete burnout. It's like I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to continue doing what I was doing, but I didn't know how to get out of it. And I started going to therapy, and that really helped, because the therapy or the therapist helped me realize how capable I was. They helped me regain that confidence. And it made me realize that all of the experience that I actually gained over the 15 years, as irrelevant as it might seem at the time, everything has helped me with game design. Not just my education, but also like when it comes to running a Kickstarter and everything, you have to deal with suppliers overseas, which is something that I had to learn and deal with. You have to learn logistics and taxes, which is all things I had to do in my previous job. So I was able to tie all the experience that I had, I mean, the networking and the socializing that I had to learn how to do as a salesperson. It's much easier in the board game space because you immediately have a connection with everybody you meet. And one really special thing about this industry is how welcoming and willing to help everybody is. Like, you know, in the world of commercial refrigeration, somebody will try to throw an anchor in your boat to try to sink you. You know, like everybody's a competitor. It's cutthroat.
From the outside, it does look like a bit of a cold industry.
I love it. Love it. But board games, like everybody's willing to help. Everybody's excited for each other. You know, there's the rising tides raise all ships kind of mentality. And I just love that so much. Like I don't ever see myself going back to kind of what I'd call corporate America, so to speak.
So you've made that transition. You're working on Gems of Eurydice as your first game. And from a business standpoint, you're live on Kickstarter right now. And why did you choose Kickstarter as the method from putting your business hat on versus going to a publisher and trying to get the game picked up by them? Or some people, are doing direct to e-commerce. So what were the thoughts behind Kickstarter specifically as a launch a mechanism, and what are the kinds of things that you're seeing with it, or how are you approaching it strategically?
So one thing that I learned from being part of like a senior leadership group in commercial refrigeration was that it helps to understand all the pain points of your company. So I made an effort to learn logistics, to learn sales, to learn design, to understand engineering. I think that by understanding all the pain points of a business, it makes you better at everything. So I think understanding all the cogs in the wheel of, designing a board game, playtesting a board game, launching a board game, fulfilling a board game, producing a board game, understanding all those pain points, I think will make me a better designer, because I'm able to look at something, but like it's very easy to design something that's really cool, but can you design something that can be made, that can be produced at a reasonable price so that it can be sold? And, there's a lot more than just designing a fun game that goes into getting a game onto a shelf at a store, I think.
Interesting. So, and specifically then Kickstarter, is that, why was that a good strategic choice?
Well, I just spoke to a lot of people that had crowdfunded games, and it just seemed that as a first-time designer, Kickstarter, from what I'm told, brings you the most organic traffic, whereas I know a lot of more established publishers will go to GameFound because I think they take less of a cut. But I think if you're bringing a large following with you, that's easier. When you don't have a following and you're kind of new to this like I am, I think it's important to try to get some of that organic traffic or eyes on my game that, don't know who I am or don't know anything about my game.
And have you approached it from from a planning perspective? Like, are you, it's out now. Was it a case of like whipping up a campaign in a couple of weeks and popping it on, or are you approaching it a slightly different way after hearing about other people's experiences?
Yeah, no. So I was very lucky that one of my friends here, James Baker, who's a designer of a game called Project EOS Rise, which is a really cool cooperative space game. He's part of my local meetup group, and he's kind of really helped me early on in the process. And the first thing he said is, make one image, whether it's your box art or something. He's like, make one image and just start collecting emails. You need to build your email list, build your following. So very early on in the process, the first illustration I had the illustrator work on was the box art. And as soon as we had that box art, right away, I just, started putting that picture everywhere and starting to collect emails. Retrospectively, I don't think I would start with the box art again. But that's the path that I took. And so spent a lot of time building that email list, and a lot of time building that Kickstarter page, and then a lot of time going to trade shows and just trying to demo the game, get the game in front of people.
Cool. Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck with the raise. What's next? What else are you working on?
So I've started working on another game, which right now I'm calling the project name. I'm calling it Haste, but it's a push your luck bag building game that I'm working on. I'm working on a few, but I think this is like the horse that I'm going to kind of go with next. So that's kind of, and I'm eager to kind of get to the point where I've submitted everything for Gems of Iridecia to the manufacturer, and at that point I'm just waiting for them to produce and fulfill, because then I'm hoping I'll have time to really shift my focus to this next game so that I can hopefully run another Kickstarter next year.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Roberto, thank you so much for taking some time to share your experience, especially about your kind of career transition. I thought that was incredibly interesting. And also to geek out about Lost Ruins of Arnak and Little Tavern with me today. If you're listening and you'd love to find out more about Rockstone and Dice, you can find them on Instagram with the handle Rockstone Dice, or by going to rockstoneanddice.com. Gems of Iridecia is live now on Kickstarter, which you can find a link for in the description of this podcast episode. Roberto, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you very much. It was a lot of fun.